The blood on Nora Owens's hands had dried to rust beneath the relentless California sun, and she knew if she stopped now, she would never start again. August 1873 had arrived with a heat that could kill a man, and Nora had watched it nearly kill her husband before the fever finished what the heat started. 3 days she had buried him in the hard earth outside their cabin, and 3 days since she realized the land deed he promised existed was nothing but whiskey dreams and empty words. The cabin belonged to a banker in Sacramento. The horses were rented, and everything Thomas Owens had told her about their new life in California was built on lies as shifting as desert sand. But Nora was not the kind of woman to lie down and let the world bury her alongside a dead man's broken promises. She took what was legally hers, which amounted to 2 dresses, a canteen, her mother's silver locket, and a stubborn will that had carried her from Boston to California in the first place. The problem was that Murphy's, the closest town, sat 40 miles northeast through terrain that most men avoided during summer months, and the only other option meant backtracking 80 miles through land controlled by men who would see a woman alone as an opportunity rather than a person. She chose Murphy's. She chose the hard way because the hard way was at least honest about what it would cost her. The first day walking, Nora rationed her water like it was liquid gold, because in this heat it might as well have been. She had filled the canteen from the creek near the cabin, and she knew it would not last her the whole journey. The sun beat down on her bonnet with a fury that seemed personal, and her boots, which had been fine for walking the streets of Boston, raised blisters that burst and bled and made every step an exercise in gritted teeth and determination. She saw her first rattlesnake around midday, coiled in the shade of a rock formation. Nora gave it wide berth and kept walking. She saw buzzards circling something dead in the distance. She kept walking. When the sun finally began its descent and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple that might have been beautiful if she had any energy left to appreciate beauty, Nora found a cluster of rocks that formed a natural shelter and allowed herself to stop. Her feet screamed when she pulled off her boots. The blisters were worse than she thought, and she had no bandages, no salve, nothing but the second dress in her pack. She tore strips from the hem, wrapped her feet as best she could, and ate a small portion of the dried beef she had taken from the cabin. Then she sat with her back against sun-warmed stone and watched the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. She thought about Thomas, but only briefly. She had loved him once, or thought she had, but love built on lies was not really love at all. What she felt now was a strange mix of grief and anger and relief that shocked her with its intensity. She was free. She was alone, and possibly dying in the wilderness, but she was free from the disappointment of discovering that the man she married was smaller than the dreams he sold her. Nora slept poorly, waking at every sound, her hand clutched around a rock that would serve as her only weapon. But nothing came for her in the night except mosquitoes and her own fears. And when dawn broke, she wrapped her feet again, pulled on her boots, and continued walking. The second day was harder. Her water was half gone, and the landscape offered little hope of finding more. The terrain grew rougher, forcing her to climb over rocks and navigate around dense brush that tore at her skirts. She saw a coyote in the distance, watching her with amber eyes before it slipped away like smoke. The sun climbed higher, hotter, and Nora felt her thoughts beginning to swim in the heat. She thought about turning back, but there was nothing to turn back to. She thought about stopping, but stopping meant dying. So she walked, one foot in front of the other, because it was the only direction that made any sense. By afternoon, her canteen was empty. She had tried to make it last, but the heat was relentless, and her body demanded water it could not have. Nora's lips cracked and bled. Her tongue felt thick in her mouth. She knew the signs of heat exhaustion from the stories men told, and she knew she was dancing close to the edge of something she might not come back from. But she had made it farther than most men would dare, and that thought gave her strength even as her body weakened. She would not stop. She would not quit. If she died out here, at least she would die moving forward. The sun was beginning its descent when she saw the rider in the distance. At first, she thought it was a mirage, a trick of the heat and her desperate mind. But as the figure drew closer, she could make out the shape of a man on horseback, leading a second horse behind him. Nora stood still, uncertain whether this stranger represented salvation or a different kind of danger. The rider noticed her when he was still 100 yards away. She could see him rein in his horse, could see the moment of surprise in his posture. Then he urged his mount forward, closing the distance between them at a steady pace that suggested caution rather than aggression. When he was close enough for her to see his face, Nora found herself looking up at a man in his late 20s with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of whiskey in lamplight. He wore the dust-covered clothes of a working cowboy, and his hat brim was pulled low against the sun. He studied her for a long moment, taking in her torn dress, her bleeding feet visible through her ruined boots, and the empty canteen hanging at her side. "Madam," he said, his voice rough from the trail but not unkind. "You lost?" "I know exactly where I am," Nora replied, and was surprised to hear how steady her voice sounded despite everything. "I am walking to Murphy's." The cowboy's eyes widened slightly. "From where?" "A cabin about 40 miles southwest of here." He whistled low. "You have been walking for 2 days?" "Yes." "Alone?" "Yes." He removed his hat, wiped his forehead with his sleeve, and settled the hat back on his head. When he looked at her again, there was something in his expression she could not quite read. Respect, maybe, or disbelief. "That is rough country you crossed," he said. "Most men would not attempt it on foot, especially not in August." "Well," Nora said, lifting her chin despite the way the world was starting to tilt around her, "I am not most men." The cowboy's lips twitched in what might have been the start of a smile. "No, madam, I can see that." He swung down from his saddle with an easy grace that spoke of years in the saddle. "Name's Boone Walker. I work for the Double Bar Ranch outside Murphy's. Nora Owens." "Mrs. Owens, you need water and you need it now. May I?" At her nod, he pulled a canteen from his saddle and handed it to her. "Slow sips," he warned. "I know you want to gulp it, but slow is better." Nora took the canteen with shaking hands and forced herself to follow his advice, even though every cell in her body screamed for her to drain the entire thing. The water was warm, but it tasted like salvation. She took 3 small sips, paused, then 3 more. "Thank you," she managed. Boone was studying the horizon, his expression thoughtful. "We have got maybe 2 hours of good light left. Murphy's is still a good 15 miles from here, and that is as the crow flies. On foot, with your injuries, you would not make it before dark. Even on horseback, we will be cutting it close." "We?" Nora asked. He turned those whiskey-colored eyes back to her. "You have made it farther than most men would dare, Mrs. Owens, and I admire your courage for that. I am saying so not to flatter you, but because it is the plain truth. But courage only gets you so far when the sun goes down and the temperature drops and the predators come out. I would be a poor excuse for a man if I left you out here to face that alone." Nora wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could make it on her own, but she knew he was right. She had pushed herself to the absolute limit, and pride would not keep her alive through another night in the wilderness. "I have no money to pay you for your help," she said quietly. "Did not ask for any." Boone gestured to the second horse, a calm-looking mare with kind eyes. "This is Bess. She has got the temperament of a saint, and she will not give you any trouble. Think you can ride?" Nora looked at the horse, then down at her wrapped feet, then back up at Boone Walker. "I can ride? Even with those feet? I said I can ride." That almost smile flickered across his face again. "Yes, madam, I believe you can." He moved to help her mount, and Nora was grateful for his steady hand and strong arm because her legs were shaking worse than she wanted to admit. The saddle felt strange after 2 days of walking, but once she was settled, something in her body relaxed slightly. Boone mounted his own horse, a tall gelding with a white blaze down its nose, and they started northeast at a steady walk. He kept looking back at her, checking to make sure she was still upright in the saddle, and Nora tried to sit straight and strong even though exhaustion was pulling at her like a riptide. You mind telling me why you were walking to Murphy's alone? Boone asked after they had ridden in silence for a while. Not trying to pry, but it might help me understand what kind of situation you are in. Nora considered not answering, but this man had potentially saved her life and deserved at least some explanation. My husband died 6 days ago. Fever. When I went through his papers, I discovered that everything he told me about our life here was a lie. We owned nothing. The cabin, the land, even the horses belonged to other people. Murphy's was the closest town, so I started walking. You have family there? Friends? No. Boone was quiet for a moment. So you walked 40 miles through some of the roughest country in California to reach a town where you know no one and have no prospects. Yes, that takes a special kind of courage, Mrs. Owens. That or a special kind of foolishness. I do not think you are a fool. Nora glanced at this stranger who had appeared when she needed help most. You do not know me. Know enough, Boone said simply. Takes a strong woman to walk away from a bad situation instead of lying down and accepting it. Takes an even stronger woman to do it alone. They rode on as the sun sank lower, painting the landscape in shades of gold and amber. Nora felt herself swaying in the saddle, and once Boone reached over and steadied her with a hand on her arm. Stay with me, he said. We are making good time. I am fine. You are exhausted and dehydrated and probably delirious, but you are still sitting that horse, which means you have got more grit than most people I have met. He paused. We will stop in a bit, let the horses rest and get some food in you. That sound acceptable? You do not have to keep helping me. I know I do not have to, Boone said. I want to. There is a difference. When they stopped, the sky was deepening to purple and the first stars were appearing. Boone helped Nora down from the saddle, and her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground. He caught her easily, steadying her until she found her balance. Easy now. Let us get you sitting down. He spread a blanket on the ground, and Nora sank onto it gratefully. Boone pulled food from his saddlebags. Simple trail fare, but it looked like a feast to Nora's empty stomach. Dried meat, hardtack, an apple that he cut into slices with a pocket knife. Eat slowly, he advised, handing her the apple slices first. Your stomach has been empty too long. Nora ate, and with each bite she felt a little more human, a little less like she was about to fall apart. Boone ate his own meal in silence, giving her space, and she appreciated that. After she finished, he examined her feet by the last of the daylight, his hands gentle as he unwrapped the makeshift bandages. These need proper tending, he said quietly. I have got some salve that will help, and clean cloth for bandages. May I? Nora nodded, too tired to protest. She watched as he worked, his movements efficient and practiced. His hands were calloused from hard work, but surprisingly gentle, and she found herself wondering about him. What kind of man rode alone through rough country and stopped to help a stranger? What kind of man carried medical supplies and knew how to tend wounds? You have done this before, she observed. Worked on ranches most of my life, Boone replied, concentrating on wrapping her feet in clean bandages. You learn to doctor horses and cattle and eventually people. When you are out on the range, you cannot always get to a doctor, so you learn to handle things yourself. He finished the second foot and sat back. That should hold until we get you to Murphy's. Doc Martin will want to look at them properly, but this will keep them protected for now. Thank you. He looked up at her, and in the fading light his eyes were darker, more serious. You do not need to keep thanking me, Mrs. Owens. This is just what decent people do for each other. In my experience, decent people are rarer than you seem to think. Something shifted in his expression, something that looked like sadness. Maybe you have been around the wrong people. They mounted up again and rode through the gathering darkness. Boone seemed to know the path by instinct, guiding his horse with confidence even as full night fell around them. The moon rose, nearly full, and provided enough light to see by. Nora dozed in the saddle, jerking awake every time she started to slip, until Boone suggested they tie a lead rope between the horses so Bess would simply follow his gelding. "Let yourself rest," he said. "I will make sure you do not fall." Nora wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could stay awake, but her body was done listening to her stubborn will. She let her eyes close, trusting this stranger in a way that would have seemed insane 2 days ago, and drifted in and out of consciousness as the horses carried them through the night. She woke fully when Boone said her name softly. "Mrs. Owens. Nora, we are here." She opened her eyes to see lights in the distance, the warm glow of windows and street lamps. Murphy's. They had made it. "What time is it?" she asked, her voice rough. "Near midnight. Most folks will be asleep, but the boarding house keeps a light on for late arrivals. Mrs. Chen runs it, and she is good people. She will have a room for you." "I told you, I have no money." Boone was quiet for a moment. "I will cover your room for tonight. Tomorrow we can figure out what comes next." "I cannot accept that." "You can, and you will," he said firmly. "You can argue with me about it tomorrow, when you have had food and sleep and medical attention. But tonight you are going to accept help, because you need it and because I am offering it freely." They rode into Murphy's, and even in the darkness Nora could see it was a decent-sized town, bigger than she had expected. Buildings lined a main street, some brick, some wood, all wearing the particular character of California gold rush towns that had survived past the initial boom and bust. Boone led them to a two-story building with a painted sign that read Chen's Boarding House and a lamp burning in the front window. He helped her down from the saddle and kept a steadying hand on her elbow as they climbed the steps to the front door. He knocked, and after a moment the door opened to reveal a Chinese woman in her 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes that quickly assessed the situation. "Boone Walker," she said. "You bring me a half-dead woman in the middle of the night." "Not half-dead," Boone replied. "Maybe quarter-dead. This is Mrs. Nora Owens. She walked 40 miles through rough country in August heat. She needs a room, a bath, and Doc Martin in the morning." Mrs. Chen's expression softened as she looked at Nora. Come in, come in. You look ready to drop where you stand." She held the door open wider and gestured them inside. The boarding house was clean and well kept, with a staircase leading to the upper floor and a sitting room visible through an open door. "I will take her from here," Mrs. Chen said to Boone. "You go take care of those horses. I want to make sure she is settled first. Boone Walker, I have been running this boarding house for 15 years. I think I can manage getting one exhausted woman into a bed." But her tone was more amused than annoyed. "Go. I will tell her you are a gentleman for worrying." Boone looked at Nora, and she saw concern in his eyes. "You are in good hands here. I will come by tomorrow morning to check on you if that is all right." Nora found herself nodding. "Thank you for everything. Get some rest, Nora Owens. You earned it." He tipped his hat to both women and left, the door closing softly behind him. Mrs. Chen studied Nora with those sharp eyes. 40 miles on foot, he said. "Yes." "And he found you how far out?" 15 miles, maybe." Mrs. Chen shook her head slowly. "That is some kind of determination. Come on, let us get you upstairs before you fall down. Bath can wait until morning when you have more strength." She led Nora up the stairs to a small but clean room with a real bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the street. Nora stood in the doorway, suddenly overwhelmed by the simple comfort of 4 walls and a mattress. "I do not have money to pay you," she said, the words catching in her throat. "Not tonight. Boone said he would cover it, but I cannot keep accepting charity from strangers." "First," Mrs. Chen said, helping Nora to the bed and guiding her to sit, "Boone Walker is not exactly a stranger to me, and if he vouched for you, that means something. Second, we will figure out payment tomorrow. Maybe you can work it off, maybe something else. Tonight you sleep. Everything else can wait. She helped Nora out of her ruined boots and dusty dress, down to her chemise, and pulled back the covers. In. Now. Nora obeyed, too tired to do anything else. The sheets were cool and clean, and the mattress felt like heaven after 2 nights on hard ground. Mrs. Chen pulled the covers up and set a glass of water on the bedside table. You need anything in the night, I am in the room at the end of the hall. Just knock. Thank you, Nora whispered. Sleep now. Morning will be here soon enough. Nora closed her eyes and fell into sleep like a stone dropping into deep water. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of activity in the street below. For a moment, she could not remember where she was, and then it all came back. The walk, the heat, Boone Walker appearing like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to pray. She sat up slowly, testing her body's reactions. Everything hurt, but it was a manageable hurt, the kind that said she had pushed herself to the limit, but not past it. Someone knocked on the door. Mrs. Owens, you awake? Yes. Mrs. Chen entered carrying a tray with breakfast and a pot of tea. Thought you might be hungry. How are you feeling? Like I walked 40 miles through rough country. A small smile crossed Mrs. Chen's face. That is honest, anyway. Eat! I sent word to Doc Martin he will be by within the hour. And before you ask, yes, Boone Walker has already been here this morning to check on you. Told him you were still sleeping, and he said he would come back later. Nora accepted the tray and found herself ravenous. Eggs, toast, bacon, and fresh fruit. She ate while Mrs. Chen busied herself preparing a bath in the corner of the room, heating water from a kettle and filling a tin tub. After you eat and see the doc, you will want this, Mrs. Chen said. Get some of that trail dust off you. I have got a dress that might fit you, since yours is not fit for anything but the rag pile. You are very kind. Kind is just smart by another name. You help people when they need it, they remember. They do better. The whole town does better. She paused. Boone told me a little about your situation. Husband died, left you with nothing. You walked to the nearest town. That about right? Yes. What skills do you have? The question surprised Nora. Skills? Can you cook, sew, keep books, clean? I am asking because if you are planning to stay in Murphy's, you will need work, and I would rather know what you can do than what you cannot. Nora set down her fork, thinking. I can read and write and do mathematics. I can sew reasonably well. I am a fair cook, though nothing fancy. I am organized and I learn quickly. Mrs. Chen nodded thoughtfully. I could use help here at the boarding house. The work is steady, if not exciting. Room and board plus a small wage. You interested? Nora found herself blinking back unexpected tears. Yes, I am interested. Then we will call your first week's room and board in advance on wages, and you can start once Doc Martin clears you for work. Fair? More than fair, thank you. Thank yourself. You are the one who walked 40 miles to get here. I am just giving you a chance to make something of it. Doc Martin arrived an hour later, a middle-aged man with gentle hands and a thorough manner. He examined Nora's feet, applied better salve than Boone's trail remedy, and wrapped them in proper bandages. You will be off those feet for a few days, he said. The blisters need time to heal properly. After that, light work only for another week. Push it too soon, and you will end up doing permanent damage. I understand. Mrs. Chen tells me you are going to work here, so at least you will not be running off anywhere. He packed up his bag and fixed her with a stern look. You are lucky, Mrs. Owens. Another day in that heat without water, and we would be having a different conversation. Or no conversation at all. After he left, Nora took the bath Mrs. Chen had prepared, and it felt glorious to wash away the grime and sweat and fear of the past few days. The dress Mrs. Chen lent her was a simple blue cotton that fit well enough, and when Nora looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand, she barely recognized the woman looking back. She looked thin, sunburned, but her eyes were clear and determined. She was sitting in a chair by the window, her bandaged feet propped up, when another knock came at the door. "Come in." Boone Walker entered, hat in hand, and something in Nora's chest did an unexpected flutter. In the light of day, she could see him more clearly. He was tall and lean, with dark brown hair that needed a cut and a face that was more interesting than handsome, all strong angles and sun-weathered skin. But his eyes were kind, and when he smiled at her, it was genuine. "You are looking better," he said. "Than a woman half dead in the desert? I should hope so." He laughed, a warm sound that seemed to fill the small room. "How are the feet?" "Doc Martin says I will live. I have to stay off them for a few days, but after that I should be fine." "That is good news." He stood awkwardly by the door, turning his hat in his hands. "I wanted to make sure you were all right, and to see if there is anything else you need." "You have already done more than enough. More than anyone should expect from a stranger. Told you before, decent people help each other. Besides, you are not exactly a stranger anymore." He paused. "Mrs. Chen mentioned she offered you work here." "She did. I accepted." "So you are staying in Murphy's?" "For now. I do not have anywhere else to go, and this seems as good a place as any to start over." Boone nodded slowly, and unless Nora was mistaken, he looked pleased by this news. "It is a good town. Good people, for the most part. You will do all right here." They looked at each other for a moment, and Nora felt that flutter in her chest again. This man had saved her life. He had shown her kindness when he had no obligation to do so. And there was something in the way he looked at her, something that made her feel seen in a way Thomas never had. "Will you visit again?" she asked, surprising herself with her boldness. "If you would like me to." "I would." His smile widened. "Then I will. I am usually in town on Saturdays for supplies, sometimes during the week if the ranch needs something. I could stop by, check on how you are settling in." "I would like that." Boone put his hat back on and moved toward the door, then paused. "You know what you did, walking all that way alone, that was something remarkable. I meant what I said yesterday. You made it farther than most men would dare, and I admire your courage for it. Not many people have that kind of strength." "I did not feel strong. I felt desperate." "Sometimes those are the same thing." He tipped his hat to her. "Get some rest, Nora Owens. I will see you soon." After he left, Nora sat by the window and watched the street below. People going about their business, horses and wagons moving up and down the main street, the ordinary rhythm of a town on an ordinary day. But for Nora, nothing felt ordinary. She had walked through fire, literally and figuratively, and come out the other side. She had no husband, no money, no prospects beyond a job at a boarding house. But she had her life. She had her freedom. And she had met a man with kind eyes and gentle hands who had appeared when she needed him most. It was enough. For now, it was more than enough. The next few days passed in a blur of rest and recovery. Nora stayed off her feet as ordered, and Mrs. Chen brought her meals and company. The older woman had a no-nonsense manner that Nora appreciated, and she told stories about Murphy's and its residents that were both informative and entertaining. "Town started as a mining camp back in '48, Mrs. Chen explained one afternoon. "Named after the Murphy brothers who started trading here. Most of the easy gold is gone now, but there is still some mining, and the town grew beyond just that. We have got ranches, farms, timber operations. It is a real town now, not just a camp." "How did you end up here?" Nora asked. Mrs. Chen's expression grew distant. "Came with my husband in '51. He worked the mines until they worked him into an early grave. I needed a way to support myself, so I started taking in boarders. Turned out I was good at it. been doing it ever since. I am sorry about your husband. It was a long time ago. I made my peace with it." She looked at Nora directly. "You will too in time. Make peace with your husband's death and what came after. And then you will move forward, because that is what strong women do." Boone came by twice more that first week, always bringing something. Fresh fruit from the ranch orchards, a book he thought she might like, an interesting rock his nephew had found that he claimed looked like a horse's head if you squinted. His visits were brief but bright spots in Nora's days, and she found herself looking forward to them with an anticipation that both excited and worried her. It was too soon. Thomas had been dead less than 2 weeks. She should not be feeling anything for any man, least of all a cowboy she barely knew. But grief was a strange thing, and Nora's grief for Thomas was complicated by anger and betrayal. She had mourned the man she thought she married, but that man had never really existed. What she felt for Boone was not a replacement for that false love, but something entirely different, something that felt more real and solid than anything she had experienced with Thomas. On her 8th day in Murphy's, Doc Martin declared her fit for light work. Mrs. Chen put her to work immediately, teaching her the rhythms of running a boarding house, making beds, preparing meals, keeping the accounts, greeting guests. The work was steady and sometimes tedious, but Nora found satisfaction in it. She was earning her keep. She was building something, even if it was just a new life, one small step at a time. Saturday came, and with it Boone Walker riding into town for supplies. Nora saw him from the front window and felt her heart kick up its pace. She tried to tell herself she was being ridiculous, but when he tied his horse outside the boarding house and came through the front door, his face lighting up when he saw her, all her self-admonitions evaporated. "Nora," he said, "you are up and walking." "Doc Martin cleared me. I am officially one of Mrs. Chen's employees now." "That is wonderful." He glanced around the empty sitting room. "Are you allowed a break? I was thinking I could show you some of the town, if you have not seen it yet." Nora hesitated. She had been outside only briefly and always close to the boarding house. The thought of walking around Murphy's with Boone was both thrilling and terrifying. "I should ask Mrs. Chen." "Already did. She said you have been working hard all week and could use some air." Of course he had already asked. Nora found herself smiling despite her nervousness. "Then I would like that very much." They walked slowly, mindful of her still healing feet, and Boone pointed out the important buildings: the general store, the saloon, the church, the schoolhouse, the sheriff's office. Murphy's was prosperous enough to have most amenities, but small enough that everyone seemed to know everyone else. People greeted Boone by name, and he introduced Nora to those who stopped to chat. "This is Mrs. Nora Owens," he would say. "She's working at Chen's boarding house." Some people had clearly heard the story of how she arrived in town because they looked at her with open curiosity mixed with respect. Others simply welcomed her with the easy friendliness of a small town used to new arrivals. They ended up at the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open land and the view stretched out toward distant mountains. Boone leaned against a fence rail and looked out at the landscape. "It is beautiful country," he said. "Hard sometimes, but beautiful." "Is that why you stayed? After you could have gone anywhere?" He glanced at her, surprised. "What makes you think I could have gone anywhere? You do not talk like a man who has only known ranch work. You read books. You carry yourself like someone who had choices and made deliberate ones." Boone was quiet for a moment. "You are perceptive." He turned back to the view. "My father was a lawyer in San Francisco, wanted me to follow in his footsteps, go to university, join his practice, but I could not stand being cooped up in an office, wearing a suit, arguing over property disputes and contract language. I wanted space and sky and work that meant something physical. So I left, found work on a ranch, and never looked back. Your family must have been disappointed." "My father was furious. My mother tried to understand. We have not spoken in 5 years. He said it matter-of-factly, but Nora could hear the hurt underneath. They think I threw away my life. Maybe I did by their standards. But I am happy. I am doing work I am good at, work that matters. I have got friends, a place in a community. That counts for something. It counts for a lot, Nora said softly. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. You understand. That is why you walked away from that cabin instead of staying and trying to make something out of nothing. You knew when to let go and when to keep moving forward. I did not feel wise. I felt desperate and angry and scared. Courage and fear are not opposites, Nora. Courage is being afraid and doing what needs to be done anyway. You have got more of it than anyone I have ever met. They stood there in the late summer sunshine, two people who had walked away from old lives and were tentatively building new ones, and Nora felt something shift inside her. This was not just gratitude for being rescued. This was not just appreciation for kindness. This was something deeper, something that felt like recognition. Boone, she said carefully, why do you keep coming to see me? He did not look away. Because I want to. Because from the moment I saw you standing in that wilderness, refusing to quit despite everything, I could not stop thinking about you. Because I look at you and see someone worth knowing. He paused. If that is too forward, I apologize. I know you lost your husband recently. I know it is too soon, but I also know I would regret it if I did not tell you how I feel. Nora's heart was hammering in her chest. My husband has been dead for 2 weeks. By all social conventions, I should be in mourning for months, if not years. I know. And despite knowing that, you are telling me you have feelings for me. I am, she took a breath. Then I should tell you that I have feelings for you too. And I feel guilty about it, because I should be grieving. But mostly what I feel is relief that Thomas is gone, and I do not have to live with his lies anymore. And when you come to visit, I feel happy, genuinely happy. And I have not felt that in a very long time. Boone's expression softened. There is no timeline for grief, Nora, and there is no rule that says you have to mourn a man who lied to you the same way you would mourn a man who loved you well. You feel what you feel. That is all anyone can do. You make it sound simple. Feelings are simple. It is everything else that gets complicated. They walked back to the boarding house slowly, not touching, but walking close enough that their arms occasionally brushed. When they reached the front steps, Boone turned to her. Can I call on you? Properly, I mean. Take you to dinner, maybe. Or a social at the church. Whatever feels right to you. Nora knew she should say no. She should wait a respectable amount of time. She should follow the rules that society laid out for widows. But society's rules had not saved her when she was dying in the desert. They had not given her a place to live or work to do or a reason to keep going. Boone Walker had done all of that, and more importantly, he made her feel like herself again, like a person with value and strength and the right to make her own choices. Yes, she said, you can call on me. His smile could have lit up the whole town. Saturday next week? Saturday next week. He tipped his hat and left, and Nora stood on the steps, watching him ride away until Mrs. Chen's voice called from inside. Are you going to stand out there all day, or are you going to come help me with the dinner preparations? Nora went inside, but she carried the warmth of that conversation with her all afternoon. The next week passed both quickly and slowly. Nora threw herself into her work at the boarding house, learning everything Mrs. Chen could teach her. She discovered she had a knack for making guests feel welcome, and she enjoyed the variety of people who passed through. Miners and ranchers, traveling salesmen and families relocating, each with their own stories and reasons for being in Murphy's. She also began to make friends in town. The woman who ran the general store, Sarah Mitchell, was close to Nora's age and had a sharp wit that Nora appreciated. The school teacher, Miss Emily Hart, was kind and well-read, and she lent Nora books from her personal collection. Slowly, Nora began to feel like she belonged in Murphy's, like she was building a real life rather than just surviving. But through it all, she thought about Boone, anticipated Saturday with a mix of excitement and nervousness that made her feel like a girl again instead of a widow of 23. When Saturday finally arrived, Nora put on her best dress, which was actually Mrs. Chin's second best dress that she had altered to fit, and waited in the sitting room. Boone arrived exactly on time, cleaned up and wearing a pressed shirt that looked like he had put actual effort into his appearance. "You look beautiful," he said when he saw her, and the sincerity in his voice made Nora's cheeks flush. "Thank you. You look very nice yourself." He took her to dinner at the hotel restaurant, which was the finest establishment in Murphy's. It was not fancy by San Francisco standards, Boone admitted, but the food was good and the atmosphere was pleasant. They sat by a window overlooking the main street and talked for hours. Nora told him about growing up in Boston, about her father who had been a clerk and her mother who died when Nora was 15. She told him about meeting Thomas, who had seemed so confident and full of plans, and how she had believed his promises of a better life in California. She told him about the crushing disappointment of discovering it had all been lies, and the strange liberation that came with having nothing left to lose. Boone told her about his childhood in San Francisco, about feeling trapped by expectations and the weight of his family's disappointment when he chose a different path. He told her about his years working ranches, learning the trade from the ground up, and the satisfaction he found in physical work and open spaces. He told her about the Double Bar Ranch, where he had worked for 3 years and hoped to eventually buy a piece of land of his own. "I want something that is mine," he said. "Not working for someone else's dream, but building my own. Maybe a small ranch. Nothing huge. Just enough to make a living and have some independence." "That sounds wonderful." "It is just a dream right now. Still saving money. Still learning. But someday." He looked at her across the table. "What about you? What do you want, Nora Owens?" No one had ever asked her that before. Thomas had told her what they wanted, what their life would be. But no one had asked what she wanted for herself. "I want to belong somewhere," she said slowly. "To have a place that is mine, where I am valued for who I am and what I can do. I want work that matters and people who care about me. I want to wake up in the morning and feel like my life has purpose." She paused. "And I want to choose my own path, not have it chosen for me. You are doing all of that already." "I am starting to, but it still feels fragile, like it could all disappear." Boone reached across the table and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "Nothing worth having is ever certain, Nora, but you are strong enough to handle whatever comes. You already proved that." They walked back to the boarding house as the sun set, and when they reached the front steps, Boone asked if he could see her again. Nora said yes, without hesitation. He came by the following Saturday, and the Saturday after that, and soon it became an established pattern. Boone would ride into town, help Nora with any heavy work that needed doing at the boarding house, and then they would spend the afternoon together. Sometimes they had dinner, sometimes they just walked and talked, sometimes they sat on the porch and watched the town go by. People began to notice, of course. In a town the size of Murphy's, two people courting was always news. Some people disapproved of the speed of it. A widow taking up with another man so soon after her husband's death. But most people, especially those who knew the circumstances, seemed to understand. And Mrs. Chen, whose opinion mattered most to Nora, approved wholeheartedly. "That man looks at you like you hung the moon," she told Nora one evening, "and you look at him the same way. Life is too short to waste time worrying about what other people think." Autumn arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and changing leaves. Nora had been in Murphy's for 3 months, and it felt more like home than Boston ever had. She was good at her work, she had friends, and she had Boone, who had become as essential to her happiness as breathing. They had not talked about the future in concrete terms, but the unspoken understanding hung between them. This was not just a casual courtship. This was two people building towards something permanent. It was in October, on a particularly beautiful afternoon with the air crisp and the sky impossibly blue, that Boone asked her to come out to the Double Bar Ranch. "I want you to see where I work," he said. "Meet the people I work with. See if you can picture yourself there." The last part made Nora's heart skip. Picture myself there? "I am not proposing yet," Boone said quickly. "I know it is still too soon, and I want to do this right. But I also want you to know that I am thinking about a future that includes you. And before we get to that point, I want you to see all of me, not just the parts I show you in town on Saturdays." So Nora borrowed a riding skirt from Mrs. Chin, who winked and said to take her time, and rode out to the Double Bar with Boone on a Sunday afternoon. The ranch was sprawling and beautiful, with rolling pastures and solid buildings that spoke of good management. Boone introduced her to the owner, Mr. Frank Wagner, and his wife, who were warm and welcoming. He showed her the horses, the cattle, the workings of a successful ranch operation. "You are good at this," Nora observed, watching him handle a skittish mare with patience and skill. "You found your calling." "I did, but I am ready for the next step, ready to build something of my own." He helped her down from a fence rail and kept his hands on her waist, looking down at her seriously. "With you, if you will have me, when the time is right." Nora reached up and touched his face, this good man who had saved her life and then given her reasons to live it fully. "When the time is right," she agreed. "I will." They kissed then, their first kiss, and it felt like a promise, like a future opening up before them, full of possibility and hope. The time came sooner than either of them expected. In November, Mr. Wagner called Boone into his office and made him an offer. Yea, there was a parcel of land adjacent to the Double Bar, 500 acres with water rights and good grazing. The previous owner had died, and the family wanted to sell quickly. Mr. Wagner was willing to front Boone the money as a loan to be paid back over time because he valued Boone's work and wanted to keep him in the area. "It is an incredible opportunity," Boone told Nora that evening, pacing the sitting room of the boarding house like a caged animal. "Everything I have been working toward, but it is also terrifying. That much debt, that much responsibility." "You can handle it," Nora said calmly. "You are one of the most capable men I have ever met." He stopped pacing and looked at her. "I cannot do it alone. I need help, a partner, someone who believes in this as much as I do." He crossed the room and knelt in front of her chair, taking both her hands. "Marry me, Nora. Help me build this ranch. Build a life with me. It has only been 4 months since Thomas died. I know. If you need more time, I will wait. But I also know what I feel. And I know what I want. I want you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and work beside you every day and fall asleep with you every night. I want to build something that is ours, together. And I do not want to waste time pretending I feel anything less than completely certain about this." Nora looked at this man kneeling before her, this good, honest, hardworking man who had admired her courage and then shown her what real love looked like. Thomas had given her pretty words and empty promises. Boone was offering her partnership, respect, and a future built on truth. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." He stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, and she did not care. This was real. This was solid. This was a choice she was making for herself, and it felt absolutely right. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Murphy's, with Mrs. Chin and Mr. and Mrs. Wagner as witnesses. Nora wore a simple cream-colored dress that Sarah Mitchell helped her sew, and Boone wore his best suit. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Nora felt like her life was finally, truly beginning. They moved into the ranch house on Boone's new property, which was small but sturdy and had good bones. It needed work, but they both had strong backs and willing hands. Over the winter months, they repaired and improved, turning the house into a home. Nora learned ranching alongside Boone, discovering she had a knack for working with animals and managing accounts. Together, they built fences, tended cattle, planted gardens, and dreamed about the future. It was hard work, the kind that left them exhausted at the end of each day. But it was honest work, work that mattered, and they were building it together. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and read or talk, or simply exist in comfortable silence, and Nora would think about that day in the desert when she had been certain she would die. She had walked through hell to get here, but it had been worth every painful step. Their first spring on the ranch brought new life in multiple forms. The cattle calved successfully, the garden flourished, and Nora discovered she was pregnant. She told Boone one evening in May after they had finished the day's work and were sitting on the porch watching the sunset. "I'm going to have a baby," she said simply. Boone went very still, then turned to look at her with wonder in his eyes. "Truly?" "Truly. Doc Martin confirmed it this afternoon when I went into town." He pulled her into his arms, and she felt him trembling slightly. "A baby. Our baby. Are you happy?" "Happy does not begin to cover it, Nora. You have given me everything. A home, a partnership, a future. And now this." He pulled back to look at her, his eyes suspiciously bright. "I love you. I do not say it enough, but I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person." "I love you too," Nora said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Their son was born in January of 1875 during a cold snap that had Boone pacing anxiously while Mrs. Chin and Doc Martin attended to Nora. The labor was long and difficult, but when Nora finally held her baby boy, she thought he was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. They named him Benjamin Thomas Walker. Benjamin for Boone's middle name, Thomas to acknowledge the past while focusing on the future. Little Ben had his father's brown hair and his mother's determined spirit, and from the moment he entered the world, he seemed intent on exploring every inch of it. The years passed in the way they do when life is full and meaningful. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts. They added more land, more cattle, built a larger barn, and extended the house. Boone proved to be an excellent rancher, and Nora discovered she had a talent for the business side of things, managing their accounts and negotiating sales with a skill that surprised them both. Ben grew into a wild, energetic child who loved horses and open spaces. When he was 3, they had a daughter they named Margaret Ann, who was as different from her brother as possible. Where Ben was loud and adventurous, Maggie was quiet and thoughtful, content to sit with her mother and learn about growing things in the garden. Nora and Boone watched their children grow with a mixture of pride and amazement. They worked hard, laughed often, and built a life that was richer than either of them had dreamed possible. They had struggles, of course, harsh winters, difficult seasons, the constant challenges of ranching life, but they faced everything together, and that made all the difference. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Boone surprised Nora with a picnic in the hills overlooking their land. They left the children with Mrs. Chin, who was still running the boarding house at 70 and showed no signs of slowing down, and rode out to a spot that had become special to them over the years. They spread a blanket and ate the lunch Nora had packed, then lay back and watched clouds drift across the sky. "Do you ever think about that day I found you?" Boone asked. "Out in the wilderness, half dead but refusing to quit?" "Sometimes," Nora admitted. "It feels like a lifetime ago, and like yesterday all at once." "I knew," he said. "The moment I saw you, something in me knew. You were the one I had been waiting for. You could not have known that. Maybe not in my head, but in here," he touched his chest. "I knew." Nora rolled onto her side to look at him. "I was such a mess. Desperate and angry, and barely holding together. You were magnificent. You still are." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch gentle. "You made it farther than most men would dare, Nora. and I admired your courage then. I still do, every single day. Tears pricked Nora's eyes. You saved my life. You saved mine too. Maybe not in the same way, but you did. You gave me purpose and partnership and a reason to build something lasting. You gave me a family. You gave me everything. They kissed as the wind whispered through the grass around them. Two people who had found each other at exactly the right moment and built something beautiful from the ashes of old lives. More years passed. Ben grew into a strong young man who loved the ranch as much as his parents did. Maggie became a teacher, taking over for Miss Emily Hart when she retired, and married a kind man who worked at the general store. They gave Nora and Boone 3 grandchildren who filled the ranch house with laughter and chaos. The double bar continued to prosper, growing into one of the most successful ranches in the area. Boone and Nora eventually paid off Mr. Wagner's loan and expanded further until they had built something they could be truly proud of. But more than the success, more than the prosperity, what mattered was that they had built it together. Mrs. Chen passed away in her sleep at the age of 78, and Nora grieved the loss of the woman who had given her a chance when she had nothing. The boarding house was sold to a young couple from Sacramento, and Nora made sure they understood the importance of welcoming strangers and giving people second chances. Sarah Mitchell remained one of Nora's closest friends, and they spent many afternoons together talking and laughing about the years gone by. Emily Hart and her husband moved to San Francisco, but they wrote often and visited when they could. Life was not perfect. They lost cattle to harsh winters and disease. They faced droughts and floods and all the challenges that came with working the land. Boone's father died without ever reconciling with his son, which left a sadness that never quite went away. Nora sometimes dreamed about those 2 days walking through the wilderness, waking up with her heart racing and her mouth dry with remembered fear. But through everything, they had each other, and that made even the hardest times bearable. On a warm evening in June of 1895, Nora and Boone sat on the porch of the ranch house they had built together and watched the sun set over land they had worked for more than 2 decades. They were in their 50s now, their hair showing gray and their bodies carrying the marks of years of hard work, but their hands were still clasped together, and their love was as strong as ever. "Do you ever regret it?" Nora asked. "Walking away from your father's plans, choosing this life?" "Not once," Boone said firmly. "This is exactly where I was meant to be. With you, building this." He gestured at the ranch spread out before them. "Do you regret any of it?" Nora thought about Thomas and his lies, about the terror of being alone and desperate in the wilderness, about the uncertainty and fear of starting over with nothing. She thought about the blisters and the heat, and the moment when she thought she might actually die out there under the merciless sun. "No," she said finally, "because it led me here, to you, to this life we built together. I would walk through that desert 1,000 times if it meant ending up here. You made it farther than most men would dare," Boone said softly, "and I admired your courage then. I admire it still." "And you," Nora replied, squeezing his hand. "You saw me at my absolute worst and chose to help me anyway. You gave me a second chance at life. You loved me when I had nothing to offer but myself. That is the kind of courage that matters most." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky darkened and stars began to appear. Inside the house, they could hear Ben and his wife getting their children ready for bed, the sounds of family and home, and the life they had all built together. This was what mattered, Nora thought. Not the past with its pain and disappointments, but the present with its joys and challenges. Not the lies Thomas had told her, but the truth she and Boone had built together. Not the woman who had walked through the desert half dead and desperate, but the woman she had become through love and hard work and partnership. She had walked 40 miles through wilderness that could have killed her. She had started over with nothing but her own determination and will. She had found love in the most unexpected place with the most unexpected person. and she had built a life that was wholly and completely her own. As the last light faded from the sky, and Boone's hand remained steady and warm in hers, Nora felt complete peace. This was home. This was love. This was the life she had fought so hard to find, and it was more beautiful than she had ever imagined possible. The stars came out one by one, filling the sky with light, and Nora Owens Walker, who had once been lost and alone in the wilderness, sat on her porch beside the man she loved and felt nothing but gratitude for every step of the journey that had brought her here. Years continued to unfold with the gentle rhythm of seasons changing and life progressing. Ben took over more of the daily operations of the ranch as Boone's joints began to protest the hard physical work. He proved to be as skilled a rancher as his father, with his mother's head for business, and under his management, the double bar continued to thrive. Maggie's children grew and brought their own personalities into the family tapestry. The oldest, a boy named after Boone, showed early signs of wanting to follow in his Uncle Ben's footsteps. The middle child, a daughter named Nora, had her grandmother's quiet determination. The youngest was still a toddler, full of mischief and joy. Nora found unexpected fulfillment in her role as grandmother. She taught her grandchildren about the garden, about keeping accounts, about the importance of working hard and treating people fairly. She told them stories, though she carefully edited the one about walking through the desert, not wanting to frighten them with how close she had come to dying all those years ago. But sometimes, when young Nora looked at her with those serious eyes and asked about how she and Grandpa Boone had met, she would tell a version of the truth. "I was lost," she would say, "and your grandfather found me. He helped me when he did not have to, and that made all the difference." In 1899, Murphy celebrated its 50th anniversary as an incorporated town. There was a festival with music and dancing, food and speeches, and Nora and Boone attended with their whole family. The town had grown over the years, but it still maintained the character that had welcomed Nora when she had nothing. People still knew each other by name, still helped neighbors in need, still maintained the community spirit that made it special. The mayor asked Boone to say a few words, given his long history with the town and the success of the double bar. He stood on the platform, looking uncomfortable in his best suit, and Nora watched from the crowd with pride. "I am not much for speeches," Boone began, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "But I will say this, Murphy's has been good to me and my family. This town took in a stubborn cowboy who wanted to make his own way. And it took in my wife when she needed a fresh start. It gave us opportunities and community and a place to call home. That is what makes a town great. Not buildings or businesses, but people who are willing to help each other build something lasting." The crowd applauded, and Boone stepped down quickly, clearly relieved to be done with public speaking. He made his way back to Nora's side, and she squeezed his hand. "That was good," she said. "It was terrible. I hate speaking in front of people. But you did it anyway. That is courage." He looked at her with those whiskey-colored eyes that still made her heart flutter after all these years. "I learned from the best." They danced that evening under strings of lanterns, moving slowly to music played by a local band. Nora rested her head on Boone's shoulder and thought about all the dances they had shared over the years. Weddings and celebrations, quiet evenings in their living room when Boone would hum a tune and pull her into his arms. Every dance was precious, a moment out of time when nothing mattered but the two of them and the music. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," he replied. Every day, more than the day before. The turn of the century came with great fanfare and speculation about what the new era would bring. Nora and Boone welcomed 1900 surrounded by family, grateful to have lived to see such a milestone. They were both in their 60s now, and while they remained active and engaged with life, they also felt the weight of years and the precious nature of time. They talked more about the past, sharing stories with their grandchildren, and occasionally with each other, even though they had lived those stories together. Memory was a strange thing, Nora discovered. The hard parts softened with time, while the beautiful moments became even more precious in retrospect. Do you remember, Boone said one evening, as they sat on their porch watching another sunset, when Ben was born and I was convinced I was going to drop him? Nora laughed. You were terrified. This big, strong rancher who could handle a 1,000-pound horse was afraid of holding a 7-pound baby. He was so small, so fragile. He is not small anymore. No, Boone agreed, watching their adult son work with the horses in the corral below. He turned out all right, did he not? More than all right. We raised good children, Boone. We built a good life. We did. He reached for her hand, as he had done thousands of times over their years together. I have no regrets, Nora. Not one. Neither do I. They sat in comfortable silence, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something that would outlast them. The ranch would continue through Ben. The values they instilled would carry on through their grandchildren. The love they shared would ripple out into the future in ways they could not predict, but could trust. As the sun sank below the horizon and painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, Nora thought about that younger version of herself walking through the desert with bleeding feet and an empty canteen. She thought about the woman who had been so desperate and afraid, who had kept walking simply because stopping meant death. She was grateful to that woman, grateful for her stubbornness and her courage and her refusal to quit, because that woman's choices had led to this moment, to this life, to this love. Thank you, she said quietly. Boone looked at her curiously. For what? For seeing me that day, for stopping when you could have ridden on, for admiring my courage instead of thinking I was foolish, for giving me a chance at a real life. You gave yourself that chance, Boone said firmly. You walked 40 miles through hell to get it. I just happened to be there for the last 15. You were there when it mattered most. We were there for each other, he corrected. That is what partnership means. Nora leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence beside her, and knew he was right. They had saved each other in different ways, at different times. They had built something together that neither could have built alone, and that was the real story, the one worth telling. The stars came out, as they did every night, and Nora and Boone Walker sat together on their porch, watching the sky darken and feeling deeply, completely content. Whatever time they had left, they would spend it this way. Together, grateful, and still very much in love. The years passed more gently now. Boone's health began to decline slowly, his joints stiffening with arthritis, and his energy waning. But his mind remained sharp, and his love for Nora never dimmed. She cared for him as he had once cared for her, with patience and tenderness and unwavering devotion. In the spring of 1908, as new life burst forth all around them and the ranch prepared for another season, Boone fell ill. It started as a cough, nothing serious, but it settled in his chest and refused to leave. Doc Martin came out from Murphy's, now an old man himself, and his expression was grave. His lungs are weak, he told Nora quietly. At his age, with his history of hard work, the body just gets tired. Keep him comfortable. Make sure he knows he is loved. Nora did both. She sat by Boone's bedside, reading to him, reminding him of their years together, telling him how much he meant to her. Their children came, their grandchildren, all gathered to say goodbye to a man who had lived fully and loved deeply. On a warm April evening, with Nora holding his hand and the window open to let in the smell of spring, Boone spoke his last words. It was a good life, Nora. The best life, because I lived it with you. It was perfect, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. You made everything perfect. You made it farther than most men would dare, he said, his voice barely audible now. I always admired that about you. Your courage, your strength. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. And you were mine, my love, my partner, my everything. He smiled, squeezed her hand one final time, and slipped away as peacefully as a person could hope for. Nora held him and cried, grieving the loss while simultaneously feeling grateful for every moment they had shared. They buried Boone on a hillside overlooking the ranch with a simple headstone that read, Boone Walker, beloved husband, father, and friend. He lived with courage and loved with his whole heart. Nora remained at the ranch, supported by her children and sustained by her memories. She was 70 years old now, and she felt every year, but she was not done yet. She continued to work in the garden, to help Ben with the accounts, to spend time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren who came along. She thought about Boone every day, missed him with an ache that never quite went away. But she also celebrated the life they had built together, refusing to let grief overshadow the joy they had shared. On the anniversary of the day they met, Nora would ride out to the area where Boone had found her all those years ago. The landscape had not changed much, still wild and unforgiving, but beautiful in its harshness. She would stand there and remember that desperate woman walking with bleeding feet and an empty canteen, and she would marvel at how far she had come. She lived another 5 years, long enough to see Ben's children grown and starting families of their own, long enough to know that the ranch would continue, that the life she and Boone built would endure, long enough to feel complete. When Nora died peacefully in her sleep in the summer of 1913, she was buried beside Boone on that hillside. Her headstone read, Nora Owens Walker, beloved wife, mother and friend. She walked farther than most men would dare and built a life worth living. The ranch continued through the generations. The story of how Nora and Boone met became family legend, told and retold to children who grew up on the same land their great-great-grandparents had worked. The values they instilled of courage and hard work and treating people with dignity echoed through the decades. The boarding house in Murphy's eventually closed, but a historical marker was placed on the site commemorating Mrs. Chin and the important role she played in the town's history. The church where Nora and Boone married still stood, hosting weddings for new generations. And sometimes, when the light hit just right and the wind blew across the hills, people swore they could feel the presence of two souls who had loved each other deeply, worked hard together, and built something that would last long after they were gone. Nora Owens had walked 40 miles through wilderness that should have killed her. She had started over with nothing but her own will and determination. She had met a cowboy who admired her courage and said so, and together they had built a life of meaning and purpose and deep, abiding love. It was a story of survival and second chances, of courage and partnership, of two people who found each other when they both needed it most. It was a story of the American West, of hard work and harsh conditions, and the human spirit refusing to quit. But most of all, it was a love story, pure and simple and true, and that love, built on truth and respect and genuine partnership, was the real legacy Nora and Boone left behind. Not just the ranch or the land or the material success, but the example of what two people could build together when they chose each other and refused to give up. In the end, that was what mattered. That was what endured. That was the story worth telling, generation after generation, as long as there were people who believed in courage and love and the possibility of second chances. Nora Owens Walker had made it farther than most men would dare, and in doing so, she had found everything she never knew she was looking for. And that truly was the happiest ending anyone could hope for.